Of all the places to finally tell the truth, an elevator between floors on a rainy Tuesday wasn't my first choice. Yet there I was, shoulder to shoulder with my office rival, the emergency light humming, my heartbeat louder, realizing competition had always been the cover story. Until we stopped. Settle in, hit like and subscribe, and share this story with someone who believes rivals can become something else today. I've always believed offices are built on habits. You learn the rhythm of the coffee machine as well as you know your own laugh. You memorize the elevator chime like a song on an old radio. You learn who always brings donuts on Fridays, who hums quietly as they arrange their pens, and who shows up with damp hair from swimming laps before dawn. And if you're me, you learn where your rival sits without ever needing to look, because everything in you tenses when he walks by. A reflex almost as comforting as it is irritating. It tells you that you care. It tells you that you want to do your best. It tells you that the person moving past your cubicle with that even stride, crisp shirt and careful eyes, my rival, Evan, has become a star you navigate by, even if you never meant to. It was a Tuesday that smelled like wet wool, the kind of rain that started in the middle of the night and didn't stop. The lobby floors were shining with footprints when I walked in, umbrella dripping, tie slightly askew. Outside, taxis hissed like kettles along the curb, and the revolving doors made a soft whoosh that swallowed the low murmur of morning greetings. This is New York, and we know rain the way we know a good bagel. Comforting, annoying, but somehow a part of the day's plan. I tapped my badge and took the elevator up to 31, where our firm did what it did. We built strategies. We handled accounts. We told stories with charts. We made people feel safe about making choices. It's a funny thing, working with money and plans and all those polished words. Underneath, we were just trying to persuade each other to trust, to buy in, to join hands for as long as it takes to get something done. The rivalry with Evan had started with a small account that became a big one after. Of course, it had already slipped through my fingers into his. It wasn't his fault. The client liked him because he listened. He listened like my grandfather did before he'd start telling a story on the porch, one elbow on the armrest, eyes wrinkled at the edges, saying, "Go ahead," with his silence. And yet, something electric and defensive in me bristled at the way Evan's name started appearing in emails that used to come to me, at the way his laugh, so quiet it hovered just above a whisper, made everyone lean in. I didn't dislike him exactly. It was worse. I respected him, and didn't know where to put that, in a world that had taught me respect was a trophy you kept to yourself. The day's hours thinned into the kind of afternoon where fluorescent lights feel like friends. A soft hum keeping you company in that peculiar way indoor lighting does. A client presentation had run long. Everyone was tired in the same scruffy way. Loosened collars, sleeves rolled to elbows, a faint sweet smell from the platter of fruit someone had set out and forgotten. I typed my last email, the rubber domes under my keys cushioning my fingers, and looked up to see the office had mostly emptied. Rain streaked the windows in silver threads. The city glowed, a damp constellation. My mother calls on Tuesdays. She has, since I graduated, a small ritual she laughs off as, "How I know you've eaten a vegetable," but really it's how we tell each other we exist, still in one another's quiet daily life. I like rituals. I like the cup I choose every morning. I like walking down the same block on my way to the subway. And I like, in a complicated way, knowing that when I stand and stretch at the end of the day and shoulder my coat, I will almost certainly see Evan doing the same a few paces away. As if the universe has them on a schedule together, the clock arranging these small intersections like beads. The fluorescent lights hummed a little louder as the rest of the floor dimmed. Only a few desks were still lit. Evan's was one of them. His posture, that gentle forward lean of someone reading closely, reminded me of library stacks and Sunday afternoons. He glanced up at me at the same moment I glanced up at him, a minor chord of eye contact that skittered across the space between us. He nodded and stood, slipping his laptop into his bag, and I reached for my coat. We both took a breath that said late night, shook our heads at ourselves, and walked toward the elevators. The hallway to the elevator bank always smells like a mix of toner and peppermint tea. Don't ask me why. The carpet has this geometric pattern designed, I'm sure, to hide coffee stains and the occasional scuff. Evan pressed the button once, knowing from muscle memory not to jab at it. We rode down to the lobby in companionable silence, playing our parts. When the doors whispered open, the lobby yawned out. Marble, plants that never seemed to die, a security guard whose smile did more to warm the place than the heat ever did. Night. Thomas, Evan said to the guard, whose name I had learned by watching Evan be that kind of person. I envied it, how effortlessly he remembered and used names. Thomas lifted 2 fingers in a salute without looking up from his crossword, and I wanted to say good night, too. I didn't. It's funny. The small ways we keep ourselves smaller than we are when someone else does a thing we want to do first. We stepped outside, under the awning that funneled the rain into neat, glassy sheets. My umbrella had broken that morning in a gust that turned it inside out like a startled insect. Evan's umbrella was intact, classic black, one of those sturdy ones you buy when you've surrendered to adulthood's insistence on preparedness. I shifted my bag on my shoulder and looked out at the street. "You headed to the subway?" he asked. His voice was careful, not cautious. Careful like a carpenter measuring twice. "Yeah," I said, but I forgot my umbrella, so I was going to make a sprint for it. Evan glanced at the sky, that heavy pewter lid. "I've got room," he said, tipping his umbrella toward me. In that moment, the rain simply existed, and we were 2 people on a wide sidewalk under a shared circle of dryness. The laugh that bubbled up in me surprised me with its warmth. I stepped under, careful not to jostle him, the umbrella handle between us like a polite fence. We walked, our shoulders nearly touching a cautious choreography. The rain made everything smell like pennies and new beginnings. I pointed at the small deli with the blue awning where, in my first week at the firm, I had accidentally ordered something that included both horseradish and jalapenos because I nodded through nerves at the person behind the counter. Evan smiled and said, "You survived," and we both laughed again. It was a small chunk of ease, like a piece of chocolate you let melt slow on your tongue. Then, as we stepped into the lobby of my subway stop, a lobby I had passed through 1,000 times without ever really seeing, the power flickered. The lights dimmed, then surged. The elevator doors at the far end, which carried us down to the platforms when the usual set of stairs was under repair, again, stood open like a stage set. A sign taped to the wall read, in block letters that felt a little triumphant, "Elevator in service." I'd made plans to meet my sister for dinner on the other side of town, the kind of simple weeknight treat you look forward to with a love that's part routine, part childhood still lingering in the corners. The stairs were closed and I didn't mind. My knees had been complaining a little lately, the ache of weather and time doing what they do. "After you," Evan said. I pressed the button for the platform level. The doors slid shut with their usual mercy. The elevator smelled like someone's cologne and damp cotton. We drifted into that soft whirring movement. Evan shook his umbrella and folded it neatly. The floor number glowed red, LB. Then, somewhere between floors, the elevator exhaled a sound like a sigh and stopped. You learn the sound of stillness sometimes by accident. It's the way a stopped elevator feels suddenly heavier around you, like a coat too tight in the shoulders. The emergency light clicked into a slow glow, warming the small space with a color that made everyone's skin look like an old photograph. The hum that had been part of the air all day quieted, and in its place my heartbeat decided to come forward, tap dancing to get my attention. "Okay," I said very calmly, more for myself than for him. "Okay," Evan echoed. His eyes found mine, their color darker in the low light. He pressed the red emergency button with the same measured touch he used on the lobby button, and a clear female voice told us help was on the way. He thanked the voice. Of course he did. I watched his shoulders, the way they settled instead of tensed. In that pause, with rain smearing the outside world into a blur, I felt the kind of small, grateful relief that arrives when you trust yourself to the process and another person. We waited, the quiet filling the space like water in a glass. I took a breath and then another. "So," I said, because conversation felt like a tiny flashlight in a dark closet, This is new. Evan smiled, a real one that made his eyes soften. Well, he said, I was thinking the day needed something unexpected. That was one way to get it, I said. Saves me from my own cooking? Is it that bad? He asked, amused, one eyebrow lifting with a grace that seemed unfairly attractive. I can do grilled cheese, I said, and pasta if the sauce comes in a jar. Anything beyond that, and I start bargaining with the smoke alarm. He laughed, and then we both hit the natural lull that follows a first joke in a quiet place. The elevator was warm in the way small spaces get warm, not uncomfortable, just human. I watched a bead of rain slide down the side of his umbrella and felt my shoulders ease. The emergency light hummed. The city went on without us. A few minutes passed. I texted my sister. Elevator issues. Running late, love you. A bubble appeared and then disappeared, and then her message arrived. Stay calm. Breathe. Call me when you're out. She added a heart. My sister is one of those people who can boil down a whole speech into 3 sentences and make you feel like you have everything you need. Family? Evan asked gently. I nodded. My sister. She worries. It's her favorite hobby. Good hobby, he said. Someone worried enough about me once that I learned to worry about myself the right amount. That sounds like a story, I said, grateful to move the conversation toward him and away from the part of me that felt like knocking on the elevator ceiling as if it were a neighbor's door. It is, he said after a breath. My dad used to get panic attacks on airplanes. He's a big guy, construction worker, hands like baseball mitts, and the first time I saw him go through it, I was 8. He sat so still and his chest was moving so fast. The flight attendant had us all count our breath with him. Everyone around us, the suits, the grandma in her floral blouse, the college kid with headphones, was just human in that moment. And afterward, he laughed and said, I guess I like to feel the ground under me. For years, when the elevator stalled even for a second, I'd feel that same rush in my own chest. He taught me to count. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 6. He said, Son, you can't always pick the sky you fly through, but you can mind your breathing. I listened to the sound of his voice counting it out, the steady numbers like stones laid in a path. I breathed with him without meaning to. 4 in, 4 hold, 6 out. The little knot behind my sternum loosened, ribbon untied. There are moments that make you feel as if the world has narrowed to the simple generosity of someone being there. Present, with you. Not solving, not fixing. Just standing, in this case literally, right next to you. Thank you, I said. The words were small but true. Anytime, he said. We're okay. We're in a metal box, sure, but a safe one. The power will catch its breath and we'll be moving again. Do you always sound like a therapist trapped in a motivational poster? I asked, smiling so he'd know I was teasing. Only after 8 p.m., he deadpanned, and we both laughed again. Our laughs bounced off the brushed steel walls and came back friendly. I cleared my throat. I guess it's a good time to say, I trailed off, the sentence running away from me with its shoelaces untied. Evan tilted his head, waiting. Not impatient. I guess it's a good time to admit I haven't disliked you, I said, the words tasting strange and clean as they left. Not the way I'm sure I've acted sometimes. You're very efficient at existing, he blinked and then softly smiled. High praise, he said. I haven't disliked you either. In fact, and please don't let this go to your head, I've learned from you. You see patterns in chaos that I miss because I'm busy being careful. The elevator's little fan whirred overhead. The math of this felt simple. 2 people, as if waiting room strangers, now confessing they aren't enemies. But of course it was not so simple. What I wanted to say next pressed at my ribs like a hand. Do you know? I said, and then stopped myself. Because what I was about to say was the truth, and truth somehow felt like something you shouldn't throw around in a broken elevator. Or maybe it was the best place for it. Humans are funny. We say the big things in elevators and kitchens and parking lots, as if the spaces marked ordinary are the safest places to be brave. Know what? He nudged, his voice soft. I looked at his hands, long-fingered and calm on the handle of the umbrella, and then at the emergency light that made us both look like we'd been dipped in honey, and finally at his eyes. When you got that first big account, And everyone congratulated you, I said. I didn't sleep. Not because I was angry, because I was proud and didn't have a place to put that feeling without thinking it meant something about me I was afraid to look at. I was raised to be careful too, but with feelings. Carefully undercover. There was a very small pause. Outside, somewhere above, footsteps made a faint thump. If I had been taller, I might have reached the hatch at the top of the elevator. As it was, it felt as far away as the moon. Evan's mouth tilted. You mean liking someone you're not supposed to like? He asked, not coy, just kind. Something like that, I said, exhaling. I'm gay, I added, a simple sentence I had spoken 1,000 times to 100 people but never to him. I don't hide it. But I think I've hidden around you, and not because of you, but because of something I do with competition. It's easier to tell myself a story where you're just the other team. Evan looked at me the way you look at someone on a bench in a park when you've both chased the same runaway dog and you're both out of breath and a little exposed. He nodded. I'm gay too, he said, very matter-of-fact. And I think I've done a version of what you just described. I can be watchful. If I can order the world, I can manage how it feels. But that doesn't always leave room for things that happen to be messy and good at the same time. Something in me that had been waiting let go. I didn't think violins would start up. I didn't expect a beam of light. But I hadn't expected the way the elevator felt larger suddenly, as if the walls themselves had decided to be generous. We stood like that. The air comfortable, our truths folded neatly between us like extra napkins. I remembered the first week I'd worked at the firm when I'd spilled coffee on a stack of reports and Evan, without a word, had handed me a clean one from his desk as if spotting me at the gym. I remembered the way he had that laugh that made you think of firelight. I remembered the time he said the word integrity in a meeting and made it sound like a real thing instead of a plaque on an HR wall. So, Evan said, tugging the thread of the moment gently, not letting it unravel completely. When this thing starts moving again, do you want to get dinner? Not in a we should discuss the next quarter's projections way. In a I like your face way. I let out a breath that came with a laugh in it. Yes, I said. Very much, yes. We both laughed, and then, like a stage manager who knows their cue, the elevator made a delicate sound, somewhere between a click and a sigh, and shivered into motion. The red lights above the doors changed obediently. We went down, and we came to a stop. The doors opened on an empty platform that smelled like pennies and damp concrete. The world poured in the way it does, indifferent in the most comforting way. We stepped out. The train hadn't arrived yet, so the platform housed only a few people standing, hands in pockets, performing the quiet little ballet of waiting. A teenager in a red hoodie, a woman with a bright scarf, a man holding a bouquet wrapped in butcher paper as if he'd plucked something living and was still a little surprised by it. Evan and I stood near a column, our umbrellas dripping polite puddles that crept toward each other. So, I said, repeating myself because sometimes the simplest words are the most honest. Dinner, he nodded. There's a diner a few blocks from my place, he offered. The kind with pancakes at midnight and a hostess who calls everyone sweetie. It's not fancy, but I like how predictable the chicken noodle soup is. I like predictable soup, I said. The train's lights appeared down the tunnel, two distant eyes blinking through steam. The rails hummed. I realized with a small burst of gratitude that the universe sometimes aligns trains and elevators and people all at once. Ride with me, I said, and it was not a command so much as a small prayer that he'd agree. He did. We boarded, sat in the facing seats that make you feel like you've written your own tiny cafe into the subway, and looked at each other like we had permission to do so for the first time. Noise filled in where quiet had been. The conversation turned to other things, the way real conversation does when you've said the biggest words in the small space. We talked about our families. He told me about his mother, who worked as a school nurse and made the kind of pancakes you can't replicate because the recipe is never just a recipe. I told him about my sister and her hobby of worrying, my father and his love for weather reports. We traded childhood stories like stickers, random, colorful, and cherished for no reason except that they were ours. We talked about work, and we said out loud the parts you're not supposed to say at work, not because they're inappropriate, but because they're vulnerable. We admitted that winning feels good, but that sometimes the version of winning we've been sold doesn't leave your heart with much to hold on to at 1 o'clock in the morning. He admitted he sometimes goes home and stands in his kitchen in the light of the refrigerator and just breathes. I admitted I sometimes feel like I'm still trying to earn a gold star that no one is handing out anymore. By the time we climbed the steps to street level in his neighborhood, the rain had softened into a fine mist that landed on our faces like breath. The diner's windows were fogged with the warm testimony of people and soup. The neon sign above the door buzzed a little, and in the corner of the window a paper snowflake was taped crookedly, though it was months past winter. The hostess greeted us with sweeties, and her hair was the color of an autumn leaf. We slid into a booth, the vinyl squeaking in a familiar, comforting complaint, and opened the menus, because that's what you do even when you already know you're getting grilled cheese and soup and maybe a slice of pie. Over dinner, we did the thing you always hope for in this life. We offered ourselves in little stories and found those stories held carefully by the person across from us. He had a scar on his wrist from falling off his bike when he was 9. He loves old movies. He keeps a plant alive by talking to it while he pours water, and the plant, in turn, has become lush and dramatic in a way that's impossible to describe without personifying it like a family member. I told him I carry a coin in my pocket that my grandfather pressed into my hand at my college graduation with the words, "Use this only when the vending machine eats your dollar," and how I have never spent it. When the pie arrived, apple, cinnamon visible like a promise, we both ate slowly, not to delay anything exactly, but to honor the feeling that this moment would be something we'd return to later, sitting in the gray light of some ordinary morning. The check came. We split it. We didn't make a bit about it. Even that felt like a gift. The simple way two people can navigate the practical and the tender without tripping over either. Outside, the mist had become the kind of air you could almost chew. We stood under the diner's awning for a second, watching a couple wrestle a stroller through the door. A teenager step off the curb with his headphones turned up to a private concert only he could hear. A man in a suit arguing with his phone gently, as if coaxing a baby to sleep. Life is always doing 1,000 small, ordinary things around your big, extraordinary moments. It felt right to have both at once. Evan looked at me and I looked back. The light from the diner turned his eyes warm. "I don't know what this is going to be," he said, "but I'd like to find out slowly." "Slowly is my favorite speed," I said, and meant it. There's a kind of love that burns fast and bright. It's another kind that builds like a quilt, one square at a time, careful and human. We didn't kiss outside the diner. Not then. We hugged. A tender, solid hug that felt exactly like leaning into the right person in the right place at the right time. Then we said goodnight in the way that means hello. The next day at work, the elevator lobby smelled like toner and peppermint tea again, and the carpet's geometric pattern continued its quiet mission. We timed our morning differently without meaning to, and we stood side by side, not quite touching, both a little unsure of the choreography we were learning. He said, "Morning," and I said, "Morning," and our voices had softened as if sleep had made us gentler. In the elevator up, I noticed his hair had a few rebellious strands that didn't respect whatever product he'd used, and I liked them for their insistence. The doors opened, and the office performed its daily magic trick. Everyone turning into the people they are at work, slipping into their roles the way actors step into costume. We stepped into ours, too, but something in the seams had loosened. In the morning meeting, when I made a point, Evan said, "That's true," without adding his usual cautious preamble. When he offered a thought, I said, and in a way that invited rather than fenced. We became, if not partners, then something that rhymed with it. People notice more than you think and less than you fear. That's one of the small miracles of office life. There were glances, not gossipy so much as curious. The woman who brings donuts on Fridays smiled at me with that knowing "oh" that says not "I know everything," but "I see you." Thomas, the security guard, said, "Morning, gentlemen," in the way he always does, and his eyes crinkled, and I liked that constancy. That week, we worked on a project together for the first time, like teammates instead of opponents. Sitting side by side at the small conference table that had seen more than its share of dry sandwiches and grand pronouncements, We built something. He was still careful, measuring twice. I still saw the pattern in the noise. We didn't pretend to be different people. We just chose to trust that the traits that had once flared in opposition could bend toward each other, like two plants growing toward the same light. At one point, around 3 in the afternoon, the high water mark of coffee and willpower, I looked over and caught him watching me with an expression like the echo of a smile. I raised my eyebrows. He shook his head lightly. Later, as we walked to the kitchen for more hot water for tea, he said, "I like watching you think." And I felt my face do that thing where your cheekbones try to learn to blush again after college. We didn't rush. After that first dinner, there was a second. A small Thai place with tables so close together that we could read the menu upside down across the way. A walk in the park that smelled like cut grass and possibility. A movie we saw in a theater with velvet seats, both of us crying a little at a scene not because it was sad exactly, but because it was kind. We talked about what we wanted. Evan wanted to build something that wouldn't need explaining if someone we loved walked into a room where we were. I wanted the same. I told my sister about Evan one night on the phone, the way you tell someone who has been your ally in all the minor rebellions of life. She made a joyful noise I won't attempt to transcribe. "I like him already," she said. My mother, when I told her, paused and said gently, "Is he good to you?" I told her yes. She said, "Okay then," in a way that meant everything it did not say. We had our first fight on a Wednesday because Wednesdays are good for that. We had both had long days. A client had been less than kind, and the copier had jammed 3 times. We were both more tired than we were wise. I wanted to do the thing I do when I'm threatened, gather my every reason like arrows and aim them. He wanted to do the thing he does when he's hurt, close the cabinet doors of himself softly and go quiet. We stood in my kitchen, the light over the stove making everything look a little too sharp, and failed to remember the elevator, the soup, the promises we had not quite named. When I said something pointed, he flinched. When he said, "I need a minute," I took it as a leaving instead of a pause. We both learned a little. The next morning, because we're both older than our pride sometimes, I brought him coffee and said, "I'm sorry. I want to listen, not win." He said, "I'm sorry. I've spent a lot of time being quiet. I'm learning how to talk when it's hard." We smiled at each other like people who had found their way back to a path that had been there all along. The office elevator, the one that took us to 31 every day, gained a new significance, though we didn't say it out loud for a while. We would step in, press the buttons that had long since shaped our fingertips, and feel sometimes the memory of that emergency glow like a warmth in our chests. "Count with me," he would joke on mornings when the elevator was too crowded for everyone's comfort, and I would dutifully count, grinning. One evening, a few weeks into whatever we were building, the elevator in our building hiccuped again. Not a full stop, just a little pause like a skipped heartbeat. The nervous laughter of strangers fluttered. I saw a woman clutch her tote a little tighter, a man glance up at the ceiling like it could answer a question. Evan and I were pressed into a corner as the elevator started again. Without saying anything, he reached for my hand. I took it. Our hands, both warm, fit together in a way that felt like a conversation had moved from words into skin. I'm not a man given to grand gestures. I admire them, but I live in the smaller ones. The way someone remembers how I take my coffee. The gentle call on Tuesday nights because that's the day my mother likes best for phone calls. The way an umbrella is tipped and shared. The way you can soften with someone, and in doing so, somehow harden your commitment to being kind. So when we kissed for the first time, finally, perhaps predictably, it was in my kitchen. Not the diner. Not a dramatic street corner with a marquee. My kitchen, with its counter slightly chipped at the edge, and the refrigerator hum that is more companion than appliance. I had made pasta with jarred sauce because I had warned him. He had brought a salad with real lettuce instead of the iceberg I always reached for. We had eaten and laughed, and then, while we stood side by side rinsing dishes, he bumped my shoulder with his. I bumped back. He looked at me. I looked at him. "Okay," he said softly, and leaned in. It was a kiss that felt careful and sure. Not a question dangling in the air, but an answer given gently. We stayed close afterward. the dish towel hanging from my hand like I'd forgotten its purpose. His forehead rested against mine. I closed my eyes and thought about the elevator, and the way sometimes we're stopped and sometimes we move, and both are part of the ride. Our relationship didn't erase our work selves. In a way, it sharpened them. I found I could present more clearly, that knowing someone would listen to me later with love made me braver about asking people to listen to me now. Evan discovered, or maybe I just noticed, that he could take a risk in a meeting without telegraphing the worry he'd always tried to manage alone. We were good for each other, yes. But we were also good with each other. There's a difference. We didn't fix one another. We simply held a flashlight when the other needed to see the next step. Months went by. We went to see his dad's construction site on a Saturday morning, ate bagels that left our fingers shiny, and listened to his father talk about the satisfaction of a beam sitting exactly where it's supposed to. I stood with him in my mother's kitchen on a Sunday afternoon, the air spiced with cinnamon, as she taught him how to cook the version of pasta sauce my grandmother used to make, the one you let simmer all day like a song on repeat. He asked questions with respect, laughing at himself when he chopped the garlic too slowly, and my mother watched him like mothers do, measuring the weight of who you bring home, not with a scale, but with that instinct that has kept her getting up every day and loving as a practice. We spent holidays together in that pleasant blur that comes after. You've decided to be in each other's lives for the long run. Thanksgiving meant 2 kitchens and one beautiful chaos of Tupperware and foil. We learned the delicate art of navigating family politics. The way you look at each other across a table when someone says something you both agree to let pass, not because it's right, but because the math of the day requires choosing a different kind of grace. We also went through ordinary life. He got the flu and I brought soup. The predictable kind he liked, the kind that tastes like home. I had a rough week where the projects stacked up like unopened mail, and he sat on my couch and watched an old movie with me while I drafted proposals. Not commenting, not fixing, just being there. Ordinary love is a daily practice, and we practiced it in the small hours when the world is quiet enough that the clink of a spoon on a mug sounds like a bell. The elevator that started it all became our private joke. On the anniversary of the night we got stuck, we went back to that subway station. It was less romantic than it sounds. The air smelled faintly of oil and garlic because the food cart outside was doing brisk business. The elevator, noble and unpredictable as all things human-made are, hummed its hummable hum. We pressed the button together. It arrived like an old friend. We stepped in and rode down and up, laughing at ourselves, both of us a little sentimental and not embarrassed about it. "Count?" he said, teasing as the doors closed. "Always," I said. And we did, not because we were afraid, but because traditions matter. Sometimes, late at night, I would wake and listen to the city breathe and think about how a small mechanical failure had given me the gift of standing still long enough to see what was next to me. I thought about that first pause, the emergency glow, the weight of the umbrella handle between us, the way I had confessed something and survived it. It is a strange and wonderful thing to realize that care can be built in milliseconds, that a nod, a breath, a word like okay can be enough to start something that will hold. Work changed, too, because life always finds its way into the places you thought you had sealed off. The office became kinder in that hushed way. Changes sometimes happen. We started a practice of beginning meetings with one real thing, something that had nothing to do with data, just life. The woman who brought donuts on Fridays shared that she was learning how to paint watercolors in the evenings. And suddenly someone else was talking about the piano lessons they had taken up again after 20 years. It wasn't therapy. It was acknowledgement. It was a small way of saying, "We are more than this meeting." Evan suggested it. I watched how easily the room took to the idea. People want reasons to be human, and they often need permission. A year after we got stuck, we were sitting on the stoop outside our building, drinking coffee out of paper cups. The morning mild and the air full of that particular blend of hope and routine that city mornings carry. Evan leaned his shoulder against mine. We watched a dog attempt dignity in a raincoat. We watched a child refuse a mitten with righteous conviction. We watched a bike courier make a life-and-death left turn like a prayer. Evan looked at me and said, "Do you ever think about who we were in that elevator?" "All the time," I said. I think about how we were both pretending so hard. We had our roles and our armor, and how stopping gave us a chance to lay some of it down. He nodded. I think about my dad counting his breath on that airplane. I think about how many people in a small space made room for him to be human. I'm grateful for that memory because it meant I had something to offer when we needed it. I'm grateful you offered it, I said. I'm grateful to be stopped sometimes. We drank our coffee. The elevator doors in the lobby opened and closed, a small choreography that had more to do with our story than anyone could guess. A neighbor came out with a bag that clinked like bottles and waved. We waved back. That evening, we went to a wedding. Not ours, a friend's. We dressed in suits that made us both stand a little taller and teased each other about our ties. We danced to a song that had been popular when we were both in high school, the kind of song that makes you know you've lived long enough to have a history. And we looked around at a room full of people promising to try, to keep showing up, to count their breaths when the plane hits a rough patch. It felt good to be part of a crowd that had decided to get large-hearted together. On the way home, we stopped for late-night pancakes because it turns out that diner does everything well, not just soup. The hostess called us honey and poured coffee as if she had known us all our lives. "You two look sharp," she said, and we thanked her with ridiculous seriousness. "What would you say?" Evan asked me over pancakes and syrup. "If you had to explain us in one sentence to a stranger in an elevator?" I laughed into my coffee. "That we stopped," I said, "and then we started in a new direction." He nodded, pleased. "I might say we learned to be on the same team," he said. "But it means the same thing." We went home, the elevator in our building obligingly carrying us upward, doing its straightforward work, the way machines do. We stepped into our apartment and took off our shoes and our jackets and our day, and I felt the kind of quiet that is a gift at the end of a day well lived. As I brushed my teeth that night, I thought about how often love is just a series of small, caring acts that add up. Like saving change in a jar until one day you realize you have enough to buy something beautiful. I thought about how often rivalry is a story we tell ourselves because it's easier than acknowledging we're afraid to be seen. I thought about how an elevator, that most ordinary of places, can be a doorway. There's a photograph on our refrigerator now. It's a print, not a phone. We took it in a photo booth at a street fair, our faces crammed into the frame, our smiles broad and unguarded. In one shot, he's kissing my temple. In another, I'm laughing so hard my eyes are closed. It's crooked under a magnet that looks like a slice of pizza. It's not art, it's better. It's proof. Sometimes on rain-soaked Tuesdays, I find myself moving through the lobby of our building, smelling the wet wool and the promises, and I think about the young version of me who stepped into an elevator with his guard up and his umbrella down. I want to tell him gently that the emergency glow isn't something to fear, that the hum of the world might go quiet, but that the quiet may be where he hears the best thing anyone will ever say to him, that a rival might turn out to be the person whose careful voice becomes home. Maybe if he listened, he'd lift his eyes and see the way someone kind is standing next to him, asking, without saying so, "Okay?" And maybe, if he took a breath, he'd say, "Okay, back," and everything could begin from there.